Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me and a big welcome to my January recent reads. So I have had a great start to my reading year. I have really been enjoying reading all of the books I have picked up. I am super motivated to read for some reason. I'm really enjoying reading backlist books that I've been meaning to get to for ages. There are also so many amazing new sounding books coming out over the next couple of months that have me very excited. Also, let's be real, my husband is away for 8 weeks training to be a firefighter, so I'm sad and need the escapism. So in January, I read 8 books, including some literary fiction, some poetry, a classic, and a fat fantasy book. I told you it was a good reading month. So let's just get into the reviews. The first book that I read in January and the first book that I read this year was Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. This is a literary novel set in Dublin following 2 university students and best friends, Frances and Bobby, when they become friends with and become involved with a married couple. So this is a backlist book that I have been meaning to read for a couple of years now, ever since I read and loved Normal People. The same story for many people, I am sure. I mentioned this one in my backlist TBR video for 2021 recently, smashed it out early on, and honestly, I kind of had the exact reaction that I thought I would to this book. I love Sally Rooney. She is an excellent writer. She is one of my favourite writers, but it is so evident to me that this was her debut novel, that this was her finding her feet and exploring her style, and that she had then honed her craft when it came to Normal People a couple of years later. So I really liked the focus in here. I really like that it is primarily a character study. I like that it focuses on millennials and young people coming of age and figuring out their shit at this time. I also really liked the writing in here generally. I really liked its sparseness and its directness. I really liked the way in which it captured dialogue. That is certainly one of Sally Rooney's strengths. But there were definitely things about this novel that I didn't feel completely worked and that I found to be quite jarring. The characters themselves being the biggest issue. The characters in here weren't just complex and flawed, they were perpetually dislikable, so angsty, to the point where I not only didn't really care about them, I was actually kind of fucked off by them. So this is an okay book, a book that holds bounds of potential, hello dog, potential that you can then see actualized in Normal People. I enjoyed the reading experience of this one because I enjoyed seeing where Sally Rooney came from. But those of you who say that this is better than Normal People, out of your fucking minds. So in the end, I gave this one 3 stars. Next up in January, I read Falling Awake by Alice Oswald. This is a contemporary poetry collection that was first published in 2016. Mutability is at the heart of this collection. This idea that humans are constantly undergoing perpetual change. And the poems in here primarily explore our physical selves and our mortality within the framework of the natural world. Another backlist book that I wanted to get to this year, another one that I have already delivered on. Ridiculously proud of myself for this. And this poetry collection was such a delight. I am so pleased to have finally read a whole collection by Alice Oswald. She's a great poet. I never doubted it. I loved the central idea here. I loved how solid and physical and real world focused this collection was, but also how fluid and fragmented and philosophical it felt surrounding the human experience. There was a constant feeling of movement in this collection, of motion and change and time passing, which was super effective. And the imagery in here is so vivid and distinct and beautiful, especially when it comes to nature and light. There were some poems in this collection that I didn't get nearly as much as others. I felt that I didn't quite understand the context of some when figures from Greek myth were thrown in. Others I just didn't personally connect to as much, but that's to be expected, I guess. Overall, I thought this was really strong, really enjoyable, and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, in January, I picked up Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. This is a new literary novel that so many people, including myself, were highly anticipating this year. I was kindly sent this proof copy by the publisher, and it actually just came out a few days ago on the 4th of February. Set in southeast London, this is essentially just a short little love story between 2 young black artists. So this book is everywhere on social media right now. People are in love with this, and I totally see why there is so much buzz around this book. I get it. Caleb Azumah Nelson is a beautiful writer. He really is. This story is focused and unflinching and tender. It feels very real. Some of the descriptions in here surrounding love and intimacy and self-realization are absolutely stunning, totally convincing. I really enjoyed the setup in here. The themes explored are super current and super interesting. I also enjoyed the 2 central characters quite a lot. However, this book did read like a debut to me, and by that I mean I felt as though I could see Caleb Azumah Nelson's thought process as I read. I felt as though I could see which elements he wanted to work in from the start. I could see which lines he felt passionate about and wanted to work things around. And none of this is to say that he isn't a talented and creative writer, because I think he is, but this didn't feel totally convincing to me as one cohesive whole. I felt as though I kept somewhat being pulled out of the narrative. So there is a lot to love and admire in here. There's tons of passion and insight, and I think that what the author is going for is super great. But for me, unfortunately, I wasn't completely sold. That being said, definitely excited by this new author and intrigued to see what he comes out with in the future. I think it's going to be really good. So in the end, I gave Open Water 3 stars. Next up, I read Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. This novel follows a man named Ames who recently detransitioned from living his life as a transgender woman. The woman Ames has been sleeping with is now pregnant, and Ames suggests this queer, non-conforming, non-nuclear family setup in which the 2 of them and Ames's ex-girlfriend Reese, who is also a transgender woman, will bring up this baby together. This is another highly anticipated release from the beginning of this year. It came out in January. Again, a big thank you to the publishers for sending me this copy. So I thought this was a great novel. I can totally see why people are loving it, and I think it's just going to get more and more popular. I just love what this novel is doing. I love its premise. It's exploration / blatant fuck you to society's age-old structures. So fab. I love how queer this book is, and how unashamedly queer. We have brilliant characters in here, we have hilarious dialogue, we have pretty tense plot-driven moments. But this book is serious at its heart. It is tender and honest, and I really appreciated the balance of all of these elements throughout. The exploration of womanhood in here was a particular highlight of mine. I loved seeing how all of these different characters came at womanhood and perceived womanhood and experienced womanhood. I thought it was done really well. I definitely learned a lot while reading this book as well. It was a very entertaining way to engage with transgender experiences and learn more about intersectional feminism. I do have to say that I did feel that the story did somewhat slip into the trap sometimes of being what it needed to be to allow some discussions to occur, rather than everything feeling totally organic and believable within the story. But overall, this was great, totally fresh, totally interesting and engaging. I don't think it totally worked 100% of the time, but that isn't really a shock. This book was tackling a lot. I definitely recommend picking this up to anyone who is interested, and in the end I gave it 3.5 stars. Next up in January, I read The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is the fat fantasy book that I mentioned. This is a standalone sapphic high fantasy novel set in a divided world when an ancient draconic enemy awakens. I am so pleased that I finally bit the bullet and picked up this novel. It has been on my shelves for so long. Everyone loves it. I was just waiting for the right time, and oh my god, I devoured this. I loved everything about this. I loved the world and the focus on queendoms and female mages and dragons, of course. I loved learning about the different areas of the world and their different beliefs and customs. I thought the structuring of the book really helped with this. The book is told from the perspective of a few different characters, and this was really effective and fun. I loved all of the characters. Their voices were quite distinct. Everyone was super badass. We have secrets and combat and romance and magic. It's totally delicious. That being said, I don't think this book was perfect. I loved that it was all contained into a standalone. It felt super fresh and really satisfying to read. But I do think this led to the end of the book feeling somewhat rushed. The two halves didn't feel totally balanced to me. But even so, I didn't really care. I was so totally immersed by this reading experience and just loved every second. This novel was such a good time. I had to give it 5 stars. Next up, I picked up Before My Actual Heart Breaks by Tish Delaney. This is another new release that I was kindly sent a proof copy of, this one coming on the 18th of February. Set in Ireland, primarily in the latter part of the 20th century, this novel follows the childhood and womanhood of our protagonist Mary. Mary is brought up Catholic and has a strange relationship with her mother and her silent father before having 5 children to a man who she doesn't love. So there were things that I really enjoyed about this novel. Tish Delaney is certainly a good writer. The Irish voices came through really strongly in here, which I was really pleased about. I really enjoyed some of the interactions between the characters. ideas in here. There were also some stunning one-liners in here that felt super fresh and really distinctive. I also just really enjoyed the whole setup here. I really liked the setting and the focus on this one woman's life and the exploration of all of her different relationships. But ultimately, this book just didn't come together convincingly for me. I ended up kind of feeling confused about where its focus was supposed to be. The odd pacing kind of contributed to this. I couldn't help but feel it would have made more sense to spend less time with Mary as a child at the beginning of the book if the focus of the novel was going to be on her relationship with her husband, which is what it ultimately came to be. But then there were also relationships in this novel that I wished we had focused on more. Mary's relationship with her childhood best friend was a particular highlight. I really wish we had spent more time with them. I thought it was really strong. So yeah, this was a bit of an odd one for me. Tish Delaney is clearly a good writer, and there were some really nice moments of insight in here. But the book as a whole just didn't work for me in the end. I kind of felt as though it was lacking something when I finished, which was a shame. So in the end, I gave this one 2.5 stars. Next up, in January, I picked up another poetry collection, and that was The Oscillations by Kate Fox. This is a proof copy that I was kindly sent of this new poetry collection coming on the 18th of February. This collection explores isolation and distance in this age of this pandemic that we are all living through the lenses of neurodiversity, trauma, and womanhood. So I totally loved this collection. It felt super current and insightful and often relatable. Pandemic-centered literature is something that we are going to be seeing a lot of over the next year, I am sure. And personally, I don't really want it in my fiction, at least not at the moment. But in my poetry and in my non-fiction, I am so here for it. I want to learn about other people's real experiences during this crazy time. I want to feel connected to these people through literature during this time where connecting to people has been so hard. And this collection really allowed me to do that. It was so spot on. I just loved how personal these poems were, how specific to this one woman's experiences, and just how raw and honest and unapologetic they were. The imagery in here is also lovely. The collection feels very well balanced. We have a nice mix of longer and shorter poems. Some are more meandering, others are harsher. I'd also say that I think this is a very accessible collection of poetry, so if you haven't read much poetry before, I think you would really like this. Totally lovely, totally relevant, and quite distinctive. I would highly recommend this collection, and in the end I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And the final book that I read in January was The Warden by Anthony Trollope. This is a pretty short Victorian novel telling the story of a small English town and primarily a clergyman named Mr. Harding. We get to witness the upheaval that follows when a young man named John Bold exposes what he believes to be an abuse of power on the part of Mr. Harding, despite his love for Mr. Harding's daughter. So this was actually my first ever Trollope novel. I have been wanting to read his stuff for a while. I knew that this novel was the first in his Chronicles of Barsetshire series, which I have heard to be a delight, so this is the one that I picked up first. And honestly, it was just as delightful as I had always been promised. I love how quiet this novel is. I love how small town focused it is. This isn't an epic novel, it isn't plot driven or particularly exciting, but it's kind of illuminating. We follow some grey characters and some grey areas of social morality and how our small acts in our small lives can mirror these things. I don't think that anyone has claimed that this is Trollope's best novel, and that doesn't really surprise me. But I did enjoy this. It felt like a very good introduction into his work, and I can't wait to read more. So in the end, I gave The Warden 4 stars. So those were the 8 books that I read and finished in January. Thank you so much everyone for hearing me chat about them. I would love to know if you've read any of them, or if you want to, please let me know down below in the comments. Also let me know what you've been reading during the start of this year. What was your best read of January? Thank you so much for watching again everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I can't wait to chat to you, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye everyone.